Hey everybody, Jeff Toyster here. Today we're going to talk about why strong cultures need diversity and representation. And so I reached out to my network and I've got J. Israel Greene. Friends call him Iz, he's got a lot to share with us today. Iz I'm going to have fun saying that, sorry, founder and CEO of Greene Consulting Group. He's a certified speaker, leadership trainer, and coach. And he was recently named, let me get this right, one of the top 10 trending diversity, equity, and inclusion training experts by All American Speakers. So it's a hot topic, but I imagine a lot of people viewing this probably have some questions about what exactly it is that we're talking about. So let's start there. Can you give us some basic definitions of diversity, inclusion, representation?
Absolutely, Jeff. So for diversity at the very basic, what you're looking at are the variations of the different characteristics that make a group of individuals unique. So when you think about that, think about race, think about ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, age, physical abilities, all of these different things that when you look at someone and you think, okay, what are they bringing to the table that I can take a look at and leverage that makes this individual different and unique for us. From an inclusion perspective, what we're doing is we're trying to make sure that they have a voice that's heard. And this is really where the representation comes in. So far too often, what you have is a company that has everything from entry-level employees, executives, middle management, and you see that they're pretty diverse at the entry level. And then the more you go up, all of a sudden, it starts trending to the opposite end of the spectrum. So our voices aren't being heard in that. And as a result, we oftentimes aren't included in those conversations or the decisions that are being made that are impacting us.
There's one thing I think that, well, there's a lot of things that you said I think are important for people to take note of, but one thing that stood out is I think the national conversation today about diversity really means obvious diversity, obvious ethnic diversity. But you pointed out there's all kinds of differences that make us diverse, make us unique. And I think I appreciate that. I'll give you one note from years ago as a recruiter. There used to be this thing in job postings that says must have a vehicle. And I always questioned that. It was like, well, why do you need a vehicle? And the answer was to get to work. What if we just made it must be able to get to work on time?
Exactly.
And you talk about, like, for example, socioeconomic status. Why is having a car a qualification for a job that doesn't involve having a car? Now we're changing the way we're looking at recruiting people and the people we're bringing to the organization.
You know, Jeff, it's so interesting that you say that. And that's such a small detail that we often overlook whenever we're doing these job postings. And as a result, so many of these postings will automatically eliminate someone simply because it says, hey, you have to have XYZ degree. So a lot of organizations are now filtering their resumes through software that says, okay, hey, remove anything that is an identifier from anyone from a different socioeconomic status or a particular background. So it strips the name down. It strips the location of where they are. It strips things like degrees. So you can no longer tell if someone went to a school in inner city Chicago or went to a school in, Boston or New York.
So I want to ask you another question that might seem a little obvious, but I think it's important to get this part of it on the table. Why should companies care about diversity or representation in terms of the employees that they hire and the type of organization they're trying to build?
There's so many reasons. I mean, we could be here all night talking about this, but a few of them are the talent that you're going to be able to attract, the statement that it sends to the community, not to mention all the benefits on the back end. I mean, companies that are more diverse, they are recognizing growth at exponential rates of companies that aren't. A good example is Deloitte just did a study where they estimate that 2.3 times greater cash flow from organizations in the top quartile of diversity and inclusion metrics. Companies that have and I think this is a McKinsey study if I'm not mistaken, but for every 10% increase and rate of racial and ethnic diversity at the senior executive level, they recognize a rise in 0.8% of their EBITDA. So you start looking at numbers like that, and all of a sudden you're able to tie those to the bottom line. But what it also does is I work a great deal with companies in the tech sector. And for them, innovation is one of the most important things that they can be doing. So all of a sudden, when you have this diversity in your organization, diversity of thought, diversity of people, you're now bringing innovation to the table, unlike maybe some of your other competitors. So all of a sudden, a thought that you might have that's a great idea is now being challenged because you have that representation that we spoke about in the beginning now sitting at the table that can challenge that thought. And you no longer have people just kind of going into the yes and the nodding, what I call the bobblehead syndrome, and they're just agreeing to everything you say.
You know, it's weird because I think people look at me and they're like, "Hey, white male, not what we're looking for right now." But I could tell you my own work experience. I've been what a friend of mine calls I've been the only male in the department. And anytime you're in that category of being the only, it's a bit of a challenge. I've been in that same department where I started as the only male, and then we had a better mix of both gender and racial diversity. And the difference was, maybe I couldn't give you a dollar figure, but the difference in terms of the team performance was palpable. We had, to your point, different perspectives in the room, different thoughts. People had to even think differently about how they treated each other in the workplace. And that generally meant better. So having that, to me, it became very interesting to see this type of representation where we were previously missing important perspectives. And the interesting thing to me about this company was I was in the HR department, which at one point I was the only male. But if you look in our operations, it was the opposite. We didn't have enough females, and we missed out on representation there. So it's amazing how being one of the only, or just being underrepresented of any type of group, can probably create an imbalance in an organization.
It truly does. Companies that are more diverse are 35% more likely to outperform in their respective industry. And even employees, if they feel like they're part of a community, and that their voice is heard in the workplace, they're almost 5 times more likely to feel empowered to perform. So when we think about representation in organizations, think about how you felt when you walked into that room as the only white male, how we feel when we walk into a sea of faces and we look around and we want to see someone that resembles us. And when you walk in and it's not there, and then when something happens and there's either an outside influence or a trigger internally, and no one is able to speak up on your behalf to say, okay, hey, as a company, we believe in this, we stand for this. And it goes back to the leadership thing, is when people are choosing to follow you or to get involved with the company, they're asking themselves 3 basic questions. And those are, number 1, can I trust you? And the second is, do you care for me? And the third one is, can I trust you? Do you care for me? And are things going to get better if I follow you? Mm. So whenever things are going on in the community and all of a sudden you don't speak up to say, okay, well, where do we stand on this? This isn't a political statement. This is a statement of human rights. And if you don't have a company that speaks up on your behalf or that says we stand for this, and you're the only face in that organization, it makes only a portion of you show up. And as a result of that, companies are now looking at presenteeism. Like, is this employee able to show up and be their full authentic self? And if that's the case, they're not able to do that.
Which then, of course, hurts what we're trying to accomplish, right? Is building an organization that's firing on all cylinders. The other challenge that I've found, though, and I hope you have some ideas for this, is when I worked in this human resources department, we made a concerted effort to increase diversity in recruiting, specifically in our management ranks. You're so right. Our front lines look a lot different than our leadership. And one of the challenges that we faced was we had a hard time recruiting people who were not white males. We tried multiple different avenues. We tried multiple different job fairs, advertising sources, you name it. And what was interesting was that helped a little bit, but a lot of times, maybe it was because of our industry, or maybe because it was a lack of existing representation. A lot of people that might have increased our diversity were like, not interested.
I'm
And
cool.
right. And I wonder for companies that maybe recognize the value of it, but feel we're open to diversity, we're just not getting the diversity we're looking for. What are some of the strategies companies can employ to increase the diversity, particularly of their leadership team?
I think there are a few different things. The simplest way is to continue to build those relationships with organizations that are out there. I sit on the board as the vice president-elect for the National Black MBA Association, Chicago chapter. And we have partnerships with organizations all across the city of Chicago. And these are Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies. And they come in and they do educational events with us so that they are more visible to our demographic and our membership. The other thing is to make sure that within your organization that you are developing the talent that is there already. So implementing mentoring programs and sponsorship programs. If you're able to sponsor someone that is from that BIPOC demographic, that's going to go a long way, because then you're developing the talent, and all of a sudden they're going to go out and share that story. So they feel included in a part of your organization, whereas before they were merely an outsider. The other thing is thinking about the recruiting process. And before, you've got tech companies, like I said, I work a great deal with tech companies. Think about where they're located in the demographic that you're recruiting. So Atlanta is booming with minorities. So the tech companies there are growing at a faster pace, as opposed to someplace like Austin and or the Valley area. So now you need to shift and almost including dollars with recruiting outside of that respective area, and include relocation dollars to say, okay, hey, we know that the talent isn't here locally, so let's expand this search. And as a result of that, let's include relocation dollars so that we can ensure that we are trying to find the talent that we want that makes us unique and diverse.
So I'm getting the sense that it's doable, but not easy. You can't wave a magic wand. One of the things that you touched on, which I want to dive a little deeper on, is the people within your organization. And I'll share a real quick example of which I think you're talking about. Years ago, I had 2 shifts of employees that worked in 2 different buildings. And we had a weekly conference call. And there was some friction amongst the team with one of my employees who worked in the smaller of the 2 buildings and worked on the night shift. She always called in for that conference call from the other building. And there was a perception that she was difficult to work with. Now, was it because she was the only Hispanic female on the team? I don't know. Was it because she was truly difficult to work with? I don't know. But here's what I do know. Once I went and took that call with her, I felt how awkward it was to be on the conference call and be not in the room with everybody else. And even that little thing, one of the things that we did was we just adjusted her schedule so that from time to time she could be on that call in person with the rest of the team. Mm-hmm. And that changed the dynamic considerably. And so I wonder if that's the type of thing that you're talking about at a micro level, which is making that extra effort to kind of help people wherever they're coming from feel included, feel a part of the team versus that outsider.
Absolutely. There's a quote, and it's not mine. I can't remember who said it, but they talked about inclusion. Diversity is asking someone to the dance, inviting them to the dance, and then inclusion is asking them to dance. And I think part of what you're speaking about now is making sure that if you say that you are about this thing, that you go beyond the lip service of it and you buy into it, and you have to act and implement as though you believe in it. So creating those small opportunities to be able to connect with that individual where it may seem, trivial to someone else, but that one little small detail can go such a long way. And if we start with those small steps, all of a sudden the journey becomes much, much shorter.
And I think that's that's probably one of the keys though, is at least for me as a leader, is it's so easy to make assumptions about people, or it's so easy to avoid those steps. I mean, when I was first hired, the first thing I was told about this employee, she's difficult, you might need to fire her. And then I spent some time with her and I watched her do the job, and I realized she wasn't being set up for success.
Yeah.
And once we changed that, 5 years later, she had my boss's job. What a
Wow.
different story, fire her versus she's probably one of our best employees, and the track record proves that. But you have to make the effort, and you have to meet people where they are. And I like that saying. I've heard that too. We have to really invite them to dance, and sometimes encourage them to dance, even if
Yeah.
they're not sure that they want to.
Yep. And it's one of those things as a leader, the true measure of leadership is in your ability to touch a heart. And John Maxwell always says, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So when you do make that effort as a leader, as their direct manager, and you put all of the predispositions out the window, and now you start making observations about the individual versus generalizations that were given to you based on how they look or what someone else has done, then all of a sudden you're able to make an impact and change in that area.
I know we're getting a little short on time. There's a question I want to make sure I ask you, which is, how do we make the conversation more inclusive? The conversation about inclusion. And so let me give you an example where I'm coming from. I think it's easy for us all to say that we all need to take an active role in building a representative workforce, diverse workforce. I can also tell you that as a speaker, as a consultant, as someone who's involved in a lot of organizations, I've heard that posed a couple of different ways. One is, we have too many white males here. Now that speaks to me. It's like, wait, you got too many of me?
Hold
You
on.
want to get rid of me? Wait a minute, I'm not on your team anymore, right? And I find that very divisive. On the other hand, though, when I've heard someone say we need more representation, it's easier for me to say, yes, I'm on board with that. Let's get more representation. And I wonder, from your perspective, how do we make it a more inclusive conversation about inclusion, so people really find it easy to get on board and not defensive?
I think that's one of the best questions that has been asked, in all honesty. And I think part of it is making sure that whenever we are doing trainings or workshops or having these conversations, that we frame things in the affirmative. And there's stats on whenever you start saying, hey, we need less white males here, that's taking the negative approach. And all of a sudden, people's guard goes up. And unfortunately, the whole issue of affirmative action and Black Lives Matter and all these different things that surround this, people are looking at this thing as though it's a pie. And the thought is, well, if I give you a bit more justice in this area, that I give up some of the justice and the things that I benefit from. And it's not that type of party. So I think we have to become very comfortable for a while being uncomfortable, to have those difficult conversations. And it's easier if you have someone come in, you invite someone in to the organization to facilitate what I call courageous conversations. And it's really identifying, okay, what happens if I've offended you? How do I know if I've done that? Should I respond and react? How do I create and cultivate these courageous conversations so that when we walk out of this room, we're better because of it? But framing things in the affirmative is the very first step to doing so.
I like how you put it better than I did, framing it in the affirmative versus the negative, because I think that's an easy concept for people to at least understand. Like, how can we do more of this? How can we be better at this versus we're doing it wrong right now? It changes our mindset. It changes the way we approach everything.
Absolutely.
I appreciate your time. I certainly gained a lot from this conversation. I think viewers will as well. I want to make sure people know how to find you, because you, like me, are focused on culture. We're just focused on slightly different aspects of culture, and I think you have a lot to offer. How do people track you down?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things people can do is email me directly at israel@israelgreene.com, or they can go to my website, which is israelgreene.com.
That makes it really easy to remember, doesn't it?
It does.
All right, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it.
Jeff, thank you so much.